Numinex, a name every Nord recognizes and immediately connects to Olaf One-Eye. A dragon famous among the people of Skyrim and beyond, less so with his alleged foul nature and murder sprees, and more so due to having been held captive in Whiterun, giving its castle the name Dragonsreach, and having been the catalyst for his kidnapper to rise in station. Not much is known of Numinex in detail, but most of what little is available to us makes absolutely no sense. From the fact that his name is more than likely not even Numinex to the way he was captured and brought to Whiterun, Agdinogdo o braan. Who was this Dovah really, and what actually happened to him? Drem Yol Lok, and welcome to the sitting area in my home leaf rest in Riverwood, Skyrim. Since we only have one book to look at today, I decided to change the scenery a little for this investigation. I do hope you are comfortable. Last time we were in my home, we dove deeply into the unexplained twin dragons Voslaram and Naslaram, armed mostly with our imagination. Today we will be turning our attention to another Dovah, who is not only rather obscured, but much of what is written and said of him, including his name, is highly questionable, if not outright nonsensical: Numinex. We will begin with his moniker, which is most likely not what he was actually called, considering what we know of Dovahzul. Then we will dive deeply into conflicting reports of his story, which is irrevocably tied with that of Olaf One-Eye, a very polarizing figure in Skyrim's history. We will attempt to fill in some gaps and offer more plausible information in places where what is proposed appears fallible, relying on the lore written within the Elder Scrolls, as well as our imagination, similarly to how we approached Voslaram and Naslaram. We will also explore an initially incredulous yet rather popular theory among braan bovitaan, fellow adventurers. We shall see what we may uncover and theorize regarding this prominent yet enigmatic dragon figure in Skyrim's often modified and incomplete history, since the Nords have a bad habit of exaggerating stories and records that they deem positive by their standards, as well as covering up or outright destroying fragments of their history they view as too dark. Without further ado, let us focus on the inked pieces of parchment where I have documented my research. Let us begin. Mora now Minda. Something I have already covered in my investigation on Otar the Mad, the dragon priest with the unique name, yet shall speak of once more due to its relevance to our current investigation, is Numinex's name. Dragon names consist of 3 rotmulage, words of power, although there are examples of dovah whose titles are made up of 2, the most famous being the legendary Thurvokun, the Master of Shadows. In my research on Otar, I speculate that Numinex's moniker had been repeated wrongly so many times over the centuries that it stuck, in spite of being incorrect, for we cannot find the translation Dodar Dovahi Foran. Only the prefix nu is a word in Dovahzul that means now in Tamrielic, and if we isolate in, we can translate it to master. However, in this case, num and x remain untranslatable. Minex too has no known interlingual rendition, similarly to min, as it is written with the rune in or I instead of ki, double I, and just so nex, inex, etc. are not a part of the dragon language either, which leaves us with 2 possibilities. The first being that Numinex's name is simply made up of rotmulage that have been lost to time and therefore impossible to translate in the 4th era, or that Numinex is not this dragon's real name. I am inclined to believe that the latter is the case for several reasons, and one of them is what Harthugnax himself says when speaking about our current topic of discussion.
I used to visit him from time to time, nearly crazed by loneliness and captivity. Tiraz Sivaz. He did not even remember his own name. I do not know how he came to be caught, but the Bronyun, the Jarl, was very proud of his pet, Pak. The Hofkossayun has been known as Dragonsreach ever since.
Did you notice what he did not mention once when talking about Tokpol Toran Hefadon? His name. Nax not only could have, but it would have been more logical of him to say, I used to visit Numinex from time to time, but he does not. Furthermore, another author favorite Dovah shares does make an impression, that his fellow dragon did not even remember his own name. I feel that the focus, or rather lack thereof, on Numinex's name in Parthugnax's dialogue alludes to Numinex not being his actual moniker. And it gets even more interesting when we look at what is possible for his title to have been if we attempt to stay as close to what he is called by the Nords as we can. The first variant is Numinex, which would translate to now cruel, and it is the one that makes the most sense as a name befitting a drake, considering what we know of how Dovah forane crosson. Then we have Numinex, which is written the same way as the former and means now we cruelty, but the inclusion of the pronoun we makes it unlikely for me. There is also Numinex, now man cruelty, and that too is plausible if his murderous nature was indeed a fact and not a mere fictive adornment of the legends surrounding him. If it is true, then he has slain many Nords, hence men, therefore he showed cruelty towards them. This could also tie with the final theory we will explore regarding Numinex, but we shall get there in due time. Then we have Numinex and Niminax, with the first translating to now I cruelty and the second to not/no I cruelty. And as I say in my research on Otar, the latter is extremely striking. It is not only in line with the legends surrounding Numinex and especially his captor, Olaf One-Eye, but it could be interpreted as something the dragon would mumble about as he was imprisoned and was slowly losing his sanity. That One-Eye was cruel, Niminax. We will come back to this when we explore the at first sight odd theory I mentioned earlier, which also happens to be the last we will discuss, but regardless, I would say this makes the most sense given all we know. In conclusion, I believe Numinex isn't actually Numinex. His real name was lost to time, just as it was eventually lost to himself. All Parthugnak Zagan, Pak. No Vosmu Mora now Fardova Hikala, which is intimately tied with that of Olaf One-Eye's. As mentioned previously, many details of the events that took place concerning our topic of discussion and his mortal enemy and captor either don't add up or are entirely left out. We will now read excerpts from a book relevant to our deep dive, and namely Olaf and the Dragon by Adonato Liotelli, who was kind enough to compile the various interpretations of the beloved myth revolving around Numinex and One-Eye into a single written expression. I quote, "One of the more colorful legends in Nord folklore is the tale of Olaf One-Eye and Numinex. Long ago in the First Age, a fearsome dragon named Numinex ravaged the whole of Skyrim. The dreadful drake wiped out entire villages, burned cities, and killed countless Nords. It seemed that no power in Tamriel could stop the monster. A skillful warrior named Olaf came forward and promised to defeat the beast. In some accounts, he is the Jarl of Whiterun. In other versions of the legend, Olaf promises the people of Whiterun that he will capture the monster if they will name him Jarl. Olaf ventures forth with a handful of his most trusted warriors and seeks the beast out, eventually finding Numinex in his lair atop Mount Anthor. Needless to say, it's an epic battle. First, Olaf comes at the dragon with his axe and his shield. Some variants of the legend say that Olaf and the beast battled with blade and claw for days, but were too evenly matched for either to gain an advantage. Most accounts hold that Olaf, perhaps frustrated that his weapons are completely ineffectual against the dragon, finally casts them aside. Giving voice to the rage that has been building within him, Olaf unleashes a terrible shout. Here again the stories diverge. Many accounts hold that Olaf did not realize he possessed the power of dragon speech, while others suggest that he had long possessed this gift, but wished to test himself against the dragon in martial combat first. Virtually all variations of the legend, however, agree on what happened next. Using the awesome powers of the dragon language, Numinex and Olaf engage in an epic shouting duel atop Mount Anthor. So forceful are their words, they are said to shatter the stone and split the sky. Finally, Numinex collapses from a combination of injury and sheer exhaustion. Somehow, and this detail is conspicuously absent in virtually every account, Olaf manages to convey the dragon all the way back to the capital city of Whiterun. The people of Whiterun are suitably impressed with Olaf's hostage. They build a huge stone-holding cell at the rear of the palace, which they rename Dragonsreach. This enormous cell serves as Numinex's prison until his death. The legend is not without its doubters, however. The bard Svaknir, who lived during Olaf's reign, wrote and performed an alliterative verse that challenged Olaf's version of events. Enraged, the High King threw the rebellious bard in prison and destroyed all written copies of the verse. There are a few ancient bard texts that provide one possible answer. These tomes suggest that Numinex was particularly foul-tempered because he was extremely old. In these accounts, the dragon spends his final years terrorizing the countryside before flying off to the top of Mount Anthor to die in peace. When Olaf finds Numinex, the dragon is too weak to defend himself. Olaf and his men capture the beast without effort, but decide to take advantage of the situation by fabricating a heroic tale. It is worth noting that all of Olaf's warriors who were set to witness the shout duel went on to become wealthy leaders during Olaf's reign as High King. However, it is equally likely that Svaknir had some grudge against Olaf, and his scandalous verse was an attempt to damage the High King's reputation. Alas, we will never know. I'm certain you have already spotted the most glaring holes in the legends regarding these two Hokoronne enemies. The first being, how in the name of Dagot Orzab's, mask, did Olaf and his entourage drag Numinex all the way from Mount Anthor to Whiterun? The former is one of the dragon lairs we can visit during our travels, and it is southwest of the former capital city of Winterhold. The distance between Mount Anthor and Tarol Sedova, as is Whiterun's name in Dovahzul, is very significant. Three possibilities of how Numinex was brought to Whiterun I can think of, all things considered, are the following. Due to his prideful nature and Palok, arrogance, Numinex struck a deal with Olaf, that he would go back to Whiterun with him if the latter managed to defeat him. If he did not believe he would lose, why wouldn't he agree to or even propose something of the sort? Then, true to his word, he went with Olaf and lived a rather miserable existence as the Jarl's pet and, according to some sources, a provider of dragon bone and dragon scale armor and weapons. Another explanation could be that, not wanting his physical form to perish since only a dragonborn or a fellow dragon can truly kill a dovah, he once more proposed or agreed to returning to Whiterun with Gain Lin Jo. If he was severely weakened and injured, he would not have had a choice. The third possibility I came up with is rather simple: teleportation magic. Provided Olaf had a powerful mage on his side, it would not have been improbable, and given Dov's incredible arcane affinity, we can even suggest Numinex himself cast the spell due to one of the previous two propositions. But if one of these three things truly happened, then why is none of them mentioned in any records? None of them diminish Olaf's feat in any way, so it makes no sense to omit this information. One reason I can think of is Olaf One-Eye is the fraud that Svaknir and many others deemed him to be. The simplest and easiest explanation behind how Numinex was captured and kept in Whiterun would be that he was defeated near the city itself, similarly to how we deal with Mirmulnir in the Fourth Era. The logistics of this scenario are much easier to explain. Olaf One-Eye is infamous among many for fabricating the story of how he captured Numinex, as mentioned by Adonata Leotelli in Olaf and the Dragon. It is not far-fetched to assume that the detail of how the dovah was transported to Whiterun and subsequently to Dragonsreach was omitted simply because the battle never took place at Mount Anthor to begin with, and there was no transportation to be made at all, not of this scale at least. Another possibility is that, once again, in spite of what the legends claim, the castle was designed to capture and hold a dovah prisoner before Numinex came into the picture. Olaf One-Eye is known to have been rather cunning, and he was clearly interested in claiming the highest possible position in the kingdom of Skyrim. If he already had the idea to present himself as an unyielding hero who could best a dragon in combat, and had promised those who knew the truth of the matter enviable positions once he would climb the social ladder to the top, then taking this course of action would make sense. As Adonato Lioteli mentions in his work, all who witnessed the epic battle between One-Eye and the dovah gained wealth and status later on. The record according to which Olaf was not yet Jarl of Whiterun at the time of Numinex's capture, but bargained with the people of the city to make him its ruler if he dealt with the Drake, adds to this theory. Therefore, Numinex could have very easily been lured to the trap, similarly if not identically to Odahviing. If Olaf was indeed capable of wielding the Thu'um as the story goes, then he could have used it to challenge Numinex, just like we do with Odahviing during our own story, only for the dragon to end up being
Havuta med Kodav, caught like a bear in a trap.
Olaf being a dragon shouter, but not dragonborn given he is never once referred to as one in any records and by him himself in Sovngarde, it is much more likely he was a tongue, offers another speculation. He knew the band will shout and use it against Numinex on Mount Anthor or wherever their battle, if there really was one, took place. Due to its effect, the dovah did as he was commanded and flew his captor, the men he had brought with him and himself to Whiterun, wa Okmeyar Gruns. This would also render One-Eye a liar. Regardless of the truth, we do know that Numinex did end up captured and held in Dragonsreach until his death, which brings us to the other two holes in the legend surrounding this dragon and his captor. The first most glaring one is the claim that his purported foul temper was due to Lod Bok, his great age, and that he recuperated on Mount Anthor to die in peace. We are well aware that Dovahzul, one, do not age due to being unazal erar and nali, and two, cannot truly die unless their soul is absorbed by a fellow dragon or a dragonborn, which we will return to later. On the former, as I have said numerous times in the past, Thu'um is a special case, and it is possible that he is not showing signs of age, but has wounds and scars that have not healed properly. I delve into Nax's appearance in depth during my research on him, but I will state that in case one of my theories regarding Thu'um's battered look is true, and namely that being in close proximity to Anti-Dahran, a time wound has influenced his physique, then this could also have been the case with Numinex, if we accept him being and feeling very old at face value. Time wounds are considered minor dragon breaks due to being krent ven nekotid, and as per Nax's own words,
The Dove are children of Akatosh. Thus, we are specially attuned to the flow of time, perhaps also uniquely vulnerable.
However, the only known Tidahran in Skyrim is at the Monaven, the throat of the world. Therefore, Numinex somehow getting in contact with distorted time flow that could have or could have not affected his body is highly unlikely. I digress. Considering what we know of dragonkind, the mentioned claims about Numinex are rendered null according to orthodox lore, although I personally would not write anything off as entirely impossible when it comes to the Elder Scrolls, for exceptions can always exist, even if I do not believe Numinex in particular to be such an example. As for his ill temperament, if he was indeed prone to terrorizing Jor, mortals, this was likely simply due to his character, not because he was grouchy due to his age. Or Numinex was a blood dragon. This subspecies of dove are known for their aggression and unquenchable bloodlust. Regardless, let us focus on the other odd loose end in the legends about Numinex, and namely, how he died. We know from Nax that he was nearly crazed by loneliness and captivity. And we mentioned before that Dove cannot truly perish unless their soul is absorbed. This technically makes Numinex resurrectable, but we will briefly go over this later. Now, the first two possible and most logical ways for the dragon to have died in captivity are that he was either killed by a merciful or perhaps fearful occupant of the castle, or that he succumbed to injuries he sustained, especially if he kept providing his captor and his entourage with dragon bone and dragon scale armor and weapons, in case the latter is indeed true and not another adornment to this already elusive and at times rather unlikely legend. There is nothing much to add to either of these theories, but they make the most sense considering what we know. The third is that Numinex lost the will to live and somehow managed to separate his own soul from his body. Even if he did not desire to be no more prior to his capture, given what he lived or rather merely existed through after, it would make sense for him wahind wakos nalas nidzuk. We know that dragons are masters of the arcane, therefore it is not far-fetched to assume he would have known a spell or two that could put him out of his misery. Alok Dilon. Necromancy is a subschool of conjuration that specializes in manipulation of souls, and as evidenced by Durnevir, Dovahzul can and do make use of it themselves. Since Numinex could not permanently end his own life due to his species, perhaps he found a way to release his soul from his exhausted body. Which brings us to the fact that he can technically still be resurrected by Alduin during the Fourth Era. Except Faolai Nak, the World Eater either doesn't find the time to do so or simply couldn't be bothered to. It is true that Numinex's scattered remains would make a possible resurrection more challenging, nonetheless, where there is a will, there is a way. Given Dove's arcane affinity as well as Nistmir Sonake Arket Gaffe, it could have been done. I think it is most logical to assume that Alduin simply did not deem resurrecting Numinex to be a priority or something he wished or needed to do at all. As we ourselves witness, there are numerous Dovahzul loyal to him to do his bidding, and if Numinex was nothing particularly special during the Firstborn's reign, then it makes sense Alduin would not waste time and resources to bring him back. There is also the possibility that he was not at all involved with Faolai Nak and the dragon cult, but given that Parthurnak seems to know him, I would say it is more likely that he was. Of course, Nax may not have known him at all, but heard of a fellow dragon's capture and gone out of his way to bestow upon him the company Donjistai Lokastide, purely an act of empathy. This would explain Undova Fadon not mentioning Numinex's name as well, because he did not actually know it, and we can interpret Nax's line, he did not even remember his own name, as him having asked Numinex to share Okforan Nuskonav. Regardless, this is all to be said about Numinex's death and his possible relation to Alduin or lack thereof. Here comes the final odd yet popular speculation regarding Numinex as a whole, Arkog Dino. The dragon didn't die, he was Olaf One-Eye in human form. The first place we hear this imaginative rendition of events is when we help Viarmo fill in the gaps of the damaged and only known surviving copy of Svaknir's tale regarding Olaf. While discussing how to complete the Edda with the Bard, we can make the suggestion for him to add that Olaf One-Eye was simply Numinex in human form, painting the former High King of Skyrim as a cunning deceiver once more, but with a twist.
Olaf was Numinex in human form. On moonless nights, he would spread wings and sail.
Now let us see if we can uncover any evidence in support of this seemingly nonsensical speculation. To begin, there is no apparent proof that Dove can take on the form of Jor, mortals be they men, mer, or beast. However, here we return to the fact that dragons are masters of the arcane, and for Aedric beings as renowned for their magical power as they are, it could possibly be achieved with the correct intention and incantation. Furthermore, Dovahkinne are examples of dragons in mortal forms. We, Tiber Septim, and the entirety of the Septim bloodline really, as well as Mirak, are all technically Dovah Jorko Pranne. Akatosh is also depicted as both a dragon and a man, heavily implying he can shapeshift into whichever form he prefers to be in, depending on the circumstances. While dragons, as per Thugnax's own words, find the concept of mortality vomindoran incomprehensible, hence why the dragon-rend shout is effective even against Akka's firstborn, taking on a form that Jor possess does not equal familiarizing oneself with mortality itself. As I said moments ago, the dragon god of time can take on the form of an anthropomorphic male, regardless of his aspect, and I do believe this to be true and not merely a human, elven, or beastly interpretation. He is a god after all. Here we return to the mystery of Numinex's name. If we accept that it is a modified version of Ni Min Nax, which translates to not/no I cruelty, and instead conclude it was not the dragon referencing Olaf, then the latter's moniker, One-Eye, would basically be the first part of Ni Min Nax's actual name, further supporting the theory that they are one and the same. Nu Mun Nax, now man cruelty, would fit well too, due to the presence of the word mun, man, but we will go with the first due to Olaf's moniker. The fellow adventurers who stand by this speculation state that, witnessing the decline of his species, Numinex, or in our current assumption Ni Min Nax, decided that it would be much safer for him to live as a man. Hence, he shapeshifted into Olaf. To add to it, let us state that Falquolor Dovah deceived the fellow dragon to fly to Whiterun and then managed to imprison him as Olaf, or the two of them truly battled or had a heated debate, given the two are one and the same for Dove, at Mount Anthor with the same result. This would also explain how Olaf was capable of using the Thu'um and why there don't seem to be any records of his life prior to him gaining fame by capturing Numinex, such as where he was born and grew up, who his family were, etc. Then this unfortunate Dovah could have been seething and whispering Ni Min Nax beneath his breath, angry at the treachery he suffered at the wings and hands of one of his own, which was eventually modified into and wrongly repeated as Numinex, and people assumed that this was the captured dragon's name. All of this could serve as an explanation behind the missing details in the accounts concerning the dragon and the future High King of Skyrim. Or through complex magics, perhaps even the dangerous and enigmatic time magic, Ni Min Nax split himself into a man and a dragon. Or more plausibly, Olaf was a separate individual that Ni Min Nax, once more through intricate arcane practices, possessed, his bigger and more powerful soul snuffing out the mortal one in the human shell entirely in taking over the body. Perhaps he transferred the largest portion of his soul into his Nordic shape, Olaf, and kept just enough in his original body so that his shell would function enough to be considered alive, and essentially imprisoned his own body Arkmalurko Oxil. This would offer a different angle to Thugnax's dialogue regarding his fellow dragon, that he was nearly crazed by captivity and did not remember his own name. Then, after a time, he reclaimed the final portion of his soul, leading to the death of his draconic body. This could also explain Olaf's ambitious nature. One-Eye climbed the Nordic pillar of social status with patience and persistence, eventually claiming the crown of the High King. Dragons are dominant by nature, hence it would make sense that Dovah would aim for the highest possible status he could achieve under the circumstances. While Olaf ended the over half a century-long War of Succession, his rule still divided the Nordic population and was marked with strife. Furthermore, if Svaknir had indeed written in his work that Olaf was in fact Ni Min Nax in human form, and it is not something we just make up on the spot alongside Viarmo, then One-Eye imprisoning the Bard and destroying every copy of his Edda he could find adds even more weight and urgency to his actions than him simply not wanting his reputation and name tarnished, like any ruler would not. It is also interesting to note Olaf had no apparent heirs. As we are aware, dragons are incapable of reproduction, although I do offer counter-arguments to this during my Voslagam and Naslagam research, fallible as they may be. Of course, this fascinating and entertaining theory has numerous loose ends and outright nonsensical weaknesses. Not only is there not a single example of a dragon changing forms, but there are two pieces of evidence that challenge this happening altogether. Firstly, the realm of Mundus is limiting to all beings, including the Aedra. Given Dovah Atomai Era Naline, even if they could shapeshift in Aetherius, doing so in Mundus would be quite the challenge. Furthermore, dragons are really prideful creatures. To many, if not all of them, taking on the skin and life of a mortal would be considered beneath their nature. Furthermore, in his dialogue, Parthonax mentions the existence of the then Jarl of Whiterun when speaking about Numinex's capture.
I do not know how he came to be caught, but the Bronyun, the Jarl, was very proud of his pet, Pak.
And most glaringly, we not only meet Olaf One-Eye in the Hall of Valor and speak to him, but we also face his Draugr remnants in Dead Man's Respite alongside Svaknir. Some do argue that the Olaf we see in Sovngarde could very well still be Numinex or Numinex in our current theory. The Nordic afterlife allows ones who have achieved legendary feats and fought great battles in, regardless of their race and personalities, which means one doesn't even need to have been benevolent or good to enter Shore's fragment of Aetherius, but it still seems rather unlikely to me. As for no records of Olaf's past existing, he is not the only historic figure whose biography is limited to the time when he achieved fame, and he won't be the last. It does not really arouse enough suspicion to treat it as something significant. Regardless of the unlikeliness of this speculation, similarly to the ones regarding Dove reproducing I went over during my Voslagam and Naslagam investigation, it was worth sharing. Taking everything we discussed into consideration, allow me to offer my own version of events regarding Numinex. I still stand by the statement that this is not his real name, but him whispering Numinex that the One-Eye was cruel underneath his breath during his captivity. I believe he was defeated in close proximity to Whiterun, or captured similarly to Odahviing, in which case Dragonsreach was already suited to hold a dovah. His physical form eventually perished due to injuries he sustained during his captivity because he was providing One-Eye and his entourage with dragon bone and dragon scale weapons and armor. And also because of the time he spent as a prisoner and possibly being weakened by magic, he could not heal properly. However, this is only my personal interpretation of what truly occurred. And on that note, today's research has come to an end. Numinex and his story have numerous blanks that are difficult to fill and question marks that cannot be transformed into full stops with certainty. I already shared my own personal interpretation of what truly happened to this dovah, and I am eager to hear your own thoughts on the matter. I always adore exchanging knowledge with you, Difadonne. Hakun Slat Kogan, thank you all for your support, as always. I look forward to having you in my home again, but until then, Lok Thu'um. Unstid gela nak bozaim frazogin, Difadonne.